Hello, good afternoon, and welcome back to the Hidebound Convivium for the first ever trad potpourri. That's what I'm calling this type of video, where I have a couple of different ideas for a couple of different videos that never got made, so they sort of get combined into one thing to save time and whatnot. So the two topics I'm going to be touching on in this video will be particularly on the symbolic importance of the Eucharist and of divine right theory and theories of justification of power. I do want to go ahead and say that I will be coming out with a extremely belated third episode of the My Bible podcast this week. And after that, I don't know what other projects I'm going to tackle. I've been severely busy the past couple of weeks, first with work and things in my personal life that came up, and then I had to prepare for a pretty rigorous state test. But I'm done with the test now, and I can get back to making more regular content. So that's what this is a part of. So sit back, relax, and as always, I welcome feedback in the comments section. And this is mainly sort of a speculative, trying to get ideas out there. So I'm more than welcome to have people tell me that I'm wrong. I would like to be told, hey, you're wrong, and this is how you're wrong. So sort of trying to start a productive dialogue here. And maybe some of these ideas will get more refined as they go on. Just trying to, make my commitment to the traditionalist or the sort of reactionary community online. But without further ado, here is Theophagy and the God-made flesh. Theophagy and the God-made flesh. Oftentimes, if an atheist or theist of the non-Christian persuasion understands a bit of Catholic theology, they can effectively derail any fruitful discussion by asserting that Catholics believe in eating the flesh of a Jewish zombie carpenter to get to heaven. While juvenile, annoying, and reductivist, this is a difficult claim to refute. After all, like all stupid but effective rhetorical hand grenades, it is true in a sense. In confronting the claim, or rather in elucidating the claim, it may profit us to say a bit more about these complexes of human rituals that have been cropping up in every culture since time immemorial. Fortunately, providing the necessary context to understand these claims is as simple as taking an exploration of something which we all have direct and tangible experience of. I speak, of course, of food. Ever since the first man popped an apple in his mouth, we have known that food in all its various permutations is important not only in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense. Bread could be seen as the distillation of many hours of sweat and torment, working in the hot sun, reaping, grinding, baking, and so forth, as in the words of the Old Testament, "From the sweat of thy brow thou shalt eat bread." The meat of the deer, or the bear, some other animal, a reward for expertise and enterprise, and good old-fashioned luck. Food has never been just food, and what's more is the idea of absent-mindedly eating food while staring at flickering images on a screen is a relative novelty in human history. You ate in community, and eating was done with purpose. No wonder, then, that eating and religion came to be so integrally linked. Eating and being eaten, I should say. This is where modern man runs into trouble, with his view of the world stripped down by his absurdly rationalistic X-ray goggles. For when the Canaanite feeds their infant to Moloch, he shall swoop in and declare, "I see no demon here consuming the child. Moloch cannot consume infants." Leave it alone that the infant all the while is burning away to ashes, its soul added to the legions of the damned, and Moloch rather satisfied with the whole state of affairs. It is modern man's examination of old ritualistic ideas that his folly is seen plainly by the honest man. For when the ancient man says, "Blood is the life force of a man," and the modern retorts that blood is merely a chemical compound evolved to carry oxygen to one's cells, he completely misses the fact that he has done nothing but vindicate the ancients. But he might say, Why does a God of reason and logic, like you Christians claim, require bloody sacrifice in the Old Covenant and in the New? It is an excellent question. One might ask, further, if God is omnipotent on the one hand and desires us to be free of sin on the other, why does he not extend pardon to all of humanity right this very instant, or to Adam and Eve in the seconds after their fall? If God is love, why does he withhold his unconditional and unequivocal forgiveness? This question presumes that one has not reasoned this concept out sufficiently. The problem in extending such a blanket of grace lies, of course, in love. For if God loves man, he must love man as he is, and not as he might otherwise be. Man is a creature of free will. Thus, he must always be able to make the most consequential choice, to serve or to not to serve. Since the default state of man in the current epoch is rebellion, the option of rebellion is made quite easy for us. The state of servitude, however, must consist in something. This something was, among other things, the sacrifice of a victim for the remission of one's sins, specifically a spotless lamb. The objection is obvious. Why force people to kill an animal for their bad deeds? Why a lamb specifically? Why not a horse or a camel? Why not a cantaloupe? By what magic does the blood of a lamb cleanse people of their sin? The very same question might be asked of any of our sacraments, baptism, Holy Communion, and so forth. The answer is the same. God has given to people these rituals so that they might be an outward sign of an inward working of himself. Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but you can't exactly see spirits with your eyeballs under normal working conditions. Why the lamb specifically, we will touch on in a moment. What makes the paschal sacrifice efficacious, but pagan sacrifices meaningless? Simply put, God has the power to bestow real graces, and fallen angels do not. This is not to say pagan sacrifices have no effect, or don't have their own sort of merit. I take as a test case the Aztec sacrifice rituals to the god Huitzilopochtli. It parallels the Blessed Sacrament well. One might even say it is a perfect parody. A sacrificial victim in the costume of the sun god has his heart torn out on a stone altar. His limbs are severed, stewed, and served to the priest and the aristocracy, so that they might partake in his divinity. Did they partake in the nature of the sun god? Yes, absolutely. But what exactly was the nature of the sun god? I leave that for you to ponder. To consume something is to bring it into oneself, and literally synthesize it as part of one's own body. After the ritual slaughter of their victims at the temple, the first century Hebrews would consume the lamb at the Passover meal. By participating in the meal, the ancient Hebrews were rededicating themselves to God and reminding themselves and their families of how God had delivered them from slavery. In AD 33, or thereabouts, in the upper room of a house in Jerusalem, a similar meal would be taking place, complete with an unblemished lamb. This is the same unblemished lamb which all of apostolic Christianity, East and West, partakes in every time the Mass is offered. Christianity means to become like Christ. We believe that Christ revealed himself to men, completely God and perfect in his godhood, and completely man, perfect in his humanity. Insofar as we aim to be perfect, like our Heavenly Father is perfect, we aim to be like Christ. And here we come to the heart of the matter. There is an old adage by which even children might grasp in the limited way we can in this life the mystery of our peculiar form of theophagy. You are what you eat. Hierarchy, legitimacy, and the traditionalist's dilemma. One of the many fault lines which separate the forces of progressivism from the forces of reaction in this day and age would seem to be the issue of right to rule. Who has the right to rule? How does one attain it? In the 18th century, the right to rule was taken from the king and the aristocracy and given to certain politicians by the way of social contract theory and the evolving idea that power derives from the consent of the governed. In the 19th and 20th century communist movements, the right to be the dictator in the impending proletarian dictatorship was rhetorically derived from the mandate of the supposedly aggrieved industrial laborer who, in nations like Russia, was a minority. In modern progressivism, the right to rule is an ever-evolving goalpost. Supposedly, power is derived from democratic selection, except when such selection is contrary to progressive aims. Consent to power can be revoked at any time for crimes against wokeness. There is still an ongoing question as to whether groups who are said to benefit from historical privilege can have a right to rule. The ongoing theological debates within progressivism about the legitimacy of power and who can wield it lead many like myself to question if progressives think power can ever be wielded legitimately. The answer is complicated, for while they themselves wield power in ways that are increasingly at odds with their stated commitments to equality, democracy, and so forth, they are also rapidly destroying any justification by which anyone can wield political power. But we know that someone must handle the iron rod of leadership. So where does this leave us? It is all well and good to point out that progressives have no framework to justify their power, but to do so does not jeopardize their power in any way. We must face the fact that rulership under a progressive framework is derived from two principal sources: the loudest elements of the mob and the opinion makers, who are often one and the same, and to whom questions of legitimacy mean nothing. But to us, questions of legitimate power do mean something. And as anti-progressives, my understanding is that, like it or not, we must embrace something akin to the divine right of kings. If the only legitimate ruler of the universe is God himself, it would then make sense that only those delegated rulers by God himself may wield power justly. God himself did delegate authorities here on earth to act in his stead, saying in Matthew chapter 10 of the Apostles, "He that receiveth you receiveth me, and he that receiveth me receiveth the one that sent me." It stands to reason, then, that whosoever submits to the authority of the apostles and their successors submits to the authority of God, and by extension, whoever receives power from the apostles and their successors receives it from God. This is why, in times past, kings were crowned by clergymen. One operating under these assumptions might rightly say that Charlemagne was crowned defender of Christendom by Christ himself through the person of Pope Leo III. The legitimacy of such a ruler can be established all the way back as a deputization to the supreme authority and the everlasting prince. But before we carry this thread of thought much further, we must address its weaknesses and failures, of which there are myriad. Firstly, this theory of political power by divine right was ascendant all over Europe for some time before dying off to constitutionalism and republicanism. And as we all know, there is no more convincing an indictment of a political theory than its wholesale abandonment. Secondly, in the age of post-Vatican II, the Church, at the very least the Roman Church, is no longer interested in conferring authority upon men. Surely, this explodes the practicality of the theory in its entirety. Thirdly, the people of Europe, and especially the people of America, are in no way prepared, willing, or able to see the establishment of such a system. Fourth, in seeking that the Church confer such power upon men, once more we are opening the door to accusations and real instances of abuse, not to mention the threat of apostasy if the Holy See were to baptize a butcher as a world leader. In this analysis, we cannot forget Machiavelli, who, in some sense, laid bare the way that power does truly work in the world, that justification of one's power is, functionally, a nice pretense to have, if it profits you in arms, influence, and popularity. But while it may be true that in the modern era, or in all areas, political power is primarily a function of popularity among the right people in command of military force, a truly traditional worldview relies upon solid foundations for the legitimacy of power. How can we persist, for example, in resisting progressive power if we do not find it illegitimate? And if it is illegitimate, what does legitimate power consist in? Tradition demands hierarchy and authority, and in my estimation, the traditionalists cannot peg the foundations of an aristocracy upon the ever-shifting tides of popular opinion. This is a puzzle I cannot solve, which I defer to the more intelligent men of my circle and those more knowledgeable in the art of politics to discuss. But, as it appears to me, Ultimate authority can only rest in He who by His very nature is Lord above all. For the Hidebound Convivium, this has been Colby Anderson, signing off.